When we first discovered that number, we thought, oh, that can't be true. But we looked at the data and the data doesn't lie. The observation was there. And so we took this course and we took this conversation to, the CFO suites and so on. And the response was, no, you're wrong. It's probably more.
Welcome to the last Lean-Agile Strategies and Tactics podcast. Lean-Agile Strategies and Tactics for your personal, professional, and corporate growth in today's constantly changing and challenging business environments. 2023 is, with Q1 in 2023, we are starting our new fiscal, or getting close to our new fiscal. We're starting our budgeting process, many organizations are, for the start of the fiscal year in the spring. And as part of that process, a lot of organizations might have a very top-down command and control approach to managing finances and budgeting. In the lean portfolio management framework or approach, we have some different budgeting tools or processes that we have in place to be able to fund what it is that we do. So as opposed to, in the context of projects, funding a particular project and outcome that project delivers, or funding particular functional silos to be able to deliver services to our clients or stakeholders, in lean portfolio management, there's a slightly different process in place. So let's start off with, in lean portfolio management, Dwayne, can you give us a general description of how budgeting works in that context, vice more traditional models?
Yeah. So the bottom line is it's not a subtle or slight change. It's a massive change. And the reason it's a massive change, it's not a lot of effort to make the change. It's a lot of cultural shift. It's a lot of mindset shift. In actuality, Lean-Agile Budgeting is a deprecation. It's a removal of constraints, of impediments, of phase gates, of checkpoints, and so forth to make the funding much more adaptable, much more agile. The high-level approach, now a lot of the companies I've worked with actually have their fiscal and calendar years tend to align. And what I've seen is the very traditional, typical approach is June, July, August of a given calendar year. They're getting ready. They're working on their budget for the next upcoming fiscal year, which, again, in my experience, many companies, January 1 is their fiscal year start as well. So these companies are sitting in June, July, August, trying to figure out what they're going to spend in November and December of the following year, 17, 18 months later. I've always been an advocate of let's use what humans are good at and set aside what we're not good at. We're terrible at predicting the future. Predicting that budget doesn't work. And we just keep doing the same thing though. But we're trying to predict it. Instead, let's build something that's adaptable. You and I, in a previous podcast, we talked about business agility. And my own definition of that is a company that has built into the way they plan, the way they think, is they build plans that expect to change. We need to build budgets that we expect to change as well. I believe that there's a comfort level in the current way that we do budgeting, but a prisoner becomes comfortable in their cell over time. Doesn't mean it's a good place to be. So the way Lean-Agile Budgeting works, and a lot of my knowledge and understanding, besides experience, comes from work by people like Bjarke Borgnes, who wrote Implementing Beyond Budgeting. And in his book, he talks about how it's a removal of these artificial constraints that we have put in place to keep people out of orange jumpsuits, whatever it might be. One of the analogies I tell is a few years ago, in the same year, we sold a cabin in the state of Wisconsin. We bought and sold a house in the state of Minnesota, and we bought a house in the state of Nevada. Don't ask why. I'm not rich, but that's what happened. In the state of Minnesota, the paperwork was about 20 some pages. State of Nevada, 400 pages to purchase a home. Whoa. And I asked the mortgage broker why that was. And he said, for every sheet you had to sign, it represents a mistake someone made in the past And to make sure it doesn't happen again, they make this form so that they check that. Rather than improving the process, improving the understanding of mortgage brokers and closers and things like that, they just put documentation in place. And that's where a lot of our budgeting process has come from. And again, it's become a prison cell that we've unfortunately become comfortable with. So what Lean-Agile Budgeting says is fund your goals. That's the essence of Lean-Agile Budgeting. Figure out what you're trying to solve. You don't have unlimited resources. You do not have a blank check that you can write for any amount. You have a finite, limited resource. You have finite, limited money, and which most of that goes into salaries and so on. But that is limited. You probably have infinite ideas and opportunities. You could keep going forever with new opportunities. So the challenge is figuring out how do we best create a funding model that allows us to pursue the right opportunities. And that's what a lot of Lean-Agile Budgeting does. Rather than using, I like to call it kind of the used car salesperson approach, where you go into a car dealership and you're looking for a particular car. What do they ask? What's your budget? Well, why is that the first question that's asked? Because they're trying to fit the cheapest car they can into your budget to make the most profit. Okay, they're trying to make a profit. I get that. I want a particular vehicle and I want to make it fit in my budget. And we fight back and forth. In companies, we have the conversations, like I said, June, July, and August, we're having those conversations. By the end of July into August and so forth, we've got a budget that's fleshing out, whether we've done it top down, bottom up, combination. We now have a budget we think, it's not happy, but we can live with it. And all the padding that goes on. Hey, we need this much, let's add 20%. Well, you don't need that much, we'll cut 50%. All of that stuff that happens. My friend John Miller, another SPCT, and we created a Lean-Agile Budgeting workshop, a 2-day workshop that we have delivered to a number of clients. And in doing the work, we discovered a number that in the average corporation, they're spending about 30% of their budget managing their budget. And when we first discovered that number, we thought, that can't be true. But we looked at the data and the data doesn't lie. The observation was there. And so we took this course and we took this conversation to, the CFO suites and so on. And the response was, no, you're wrong. It's probably more. And that's what was frightening, is we're spending up towards or more than 30% of our budget just managing the budget. So if you think about Lean-Agile Budgeting, one of the main reasons for doing it not only is effectiveness, efficiency, and adaptability, adjustability, it's you get a lot of that budget back to spend on solving customer problems, not managing spreadsheets. And also what I found, the typical CFO suite, the financial minded person in a company, they've gone through education, probably formal education. They probably have formal accounting, they have business experience and so forth. In that school, they learned a particular way to do it. Mm-hmm. And then they get into the business world and it's spreadsheets and change management and all those things that add up to that 30%. What they really want to do is learn what they learned in school of how to take the analytics and project where the markets will go. How do we determine what the strength of this market versus that? That's what they want to be doing. What are they doing? They're sitting in change management review meetings, determining whether they can move, $50,000 from this project budget to that project budget. We're taking aerospace engineers and having them say, do you want fries with that? It's not what they're trained to do. It's not what they're good at. So Lean-Agile Budgeting, it's not something I can describe in a podcast. It's something to be learned and educated and so forth. But the bottom line is it's a deprecation, but it's not a wild, wild west crazy chaos. It's a different approach, a different way of thinking about creating a budget that is much more adaptable, just as accountable. In fact, probably more so on accountability, far less risky, and far more effective. And you get a lot of the cost of traditional budgeting back that you can now apply to solving customer problems.
And thinking about the cost and sort of the return on that investment, so to speak, in Lean Agile, we and SAFE specifically, we focus on funding value streams, or the collective energy and effort and everything that goes into that to be able to produce different degrees of value towards a specific kind of business outcome. And in that process, they have something called participatory budgeting, and that's one element of the various things that go on here. Can you describe what that is and what the benefit of that process is in determining how to allocate funds towards various initiatives and projects?
So first, I'll give a very brief description of a very deep and complex subject, value streams. In SAFE, we focus on operational value streams, development value streams. We're looking at business value streams as well. A development value stream, think of it this way, and one of my past students and now a SAFE coach came up with this analogy. It's a deserted island, and you're bringing the right people onto that island that without having to send a boat back to the mainland, they can solve problems. So let's say the problem is just surviving and thriving on this island. Okay, we're going to need some doctors. We're going to need some hunter-gatherer types. We're going to have some construction people to build housing. All these, we're going to need these different skill sets on this island so we don't have to have the boat going back and forth to the mainland every 5 minutes. That's a really high-level analogy of what a development value stream is. It's that collection of people that together, bringing different skill sets, as you said, are there to help solve a common problem. Now, in SAFE, that's one of the approaches we take to Lean-Agile Budgeting is we fund development value streams. And I like to equate it to funding the factory. In manufacturing, you don't fund each individual widget you're manufacturing through that. You fund the factory, and you expect the factory to deliver as many valuable widgets as possible. And the cool thing is, in a factory, if the widgets need to improve, if we need to change which widget, it doesn't matter. We just focus, we change the machines, we change the approach. The factory is funded, and we deliver the value as much as we can. That's the difference in development value streams and in Lean-Agile Budgeting and SAFE from traditional project-based, is we're not funding each individual project, we're funding the factory, funding that island, that development value stream, and saying, okay, we're going to fund you for the year, the quarter, whatever it might be. We want you to go solve as many valuable problems for the customer as we possibly can. Now, a lot of that 30% waste in change management and so forth goes away, because rather than getting approval to move to the next thing, we clearly see what the next thing is. We just pivot and adjust to it. The 5-week change management process becomes a 5-minute discussion, and it's much more effective too. And you asked about participatory budgeting. Well, how do we know how to fund these development value streams? There's a lot of metrics in there. The high-level analogy I use is fund to your goals. What's important to you? What's less important? What are the opportunities? But you need a little bit more data than that. And you want to have a bit of a community-based information approach. And that's where participatory budgeting comes in. We look at each of these development value streams. And these development value streams are typically delivering on, again, what we call in SAFE epics, major large-scale initiatives, large things to solve, problems to solve, opportunities, and so on. Each of those epics, we don't directly fund epics, but since we're funding the factory, it's going to take a portion of the capacity of that factory to deliver. Is it worth that amount of capacity dedicated to solving that problem? That's essentially what participatory budgeting is doing. Now, in PB, as we call it for short, you can do it different ways. You can have actual dollars associated. What do we think it's going to cost in, let's say, capacity dollars? You could use capacity points, different things, but some way of equating a numerical cost to delivering on that epic as we see it today. And then we have teams. We have a group, a ceremony. We have an event where we bring people into a room, and we have a group of people at different tables, if you will. You can do it remote, but they're different from different walks of the organization. You might have different people, from different groups and departments at each table. So you have a good cross-functional approach at each table. And then at each table, Each person has a portion of the overall budget we have for that portfolio. Let's say we have 6 development value streams. In total, we're managing a portfolio budget of 100 million, and that needs to be distributed across these DVSs. So we take that 100 million and we distribute it. Each person at the table gets a chunk of it. Let's say there's 10 people, they each get 10 million. And then they look at those epics, those potential problems to solve, and they say, I would be willing to contribute 3 million of my 10 to this, 2 million of my 10 to this, and 500,000 to this, and so forth. And each person at the table is contributing based on that. And we come up with a community consensus from that table. Now, after they've gone the negotiation and the little bit of the back and forth, hey, if you contribute on this, I'll contribute on this kind of thing. There's a lot of good. It's fun. It's engaging. It's very high energy. Now we have these different tables with different perspectives. We combine those together. And we use a spreadsheet-driven approach where we collect that information together. We look for the outliers and we look for the common themes. And that data comes back and gives us really good information that helps inform the budgeting process. Now, PB, the outcome from PB does not create lean agile budgets, but it heavily influences them. It heavily helps us steer from a portfolio approach. How should we allocate? We have 10 factories. Should we increase funding for this factory because of the opportunities that are there? Maybe decrease funding for this factory because they've solved so many problems. There's less effort needed there. That's what PB helps to inform. The key thing is it's not the only influencer. It's not the only piece of data, but it's a key one.
The thing I like the most about PB or participatory budgeting is the idea that although it, in its truest sense, it's not decentralized decision making because they're not making the decision, but it's the idea that you're polling the population of your workforce, and like you said, cross-functionally, they have different backgrounds, insights, contexts for what it is that you're working on overall as an organization. They have different perspectives on the value and the investment and the future potential of whatever it is that you're creating. And that all gets factored into, the end result. And the ability to take that data that you described and maybe see any particular outliers or insights that come from that. For example, if there's a budgeting officer and they have a certain list of priorities or how they sort of pre-formatted in their mind what that budget might look like. And when they get the participatory budget back and they see a misalignment or something that stands out that the community decided was important and the budgeting officer did not for whatever reason, that sparks a discussion and discovery around what is it about this thing, whatever that item is, that is perceived to be so valuable. What piece of information do they have that you're missing, or vice versa? And that allows for more transparency, more communication, more stakeholder engagement, both internal and external, and I would imagine better overall results.
Yes, absolutely. So there's a term I want to introduce. You talked about decentralized decision-making, DDM, DDI, decentralized decision information, informing. And that's what participatory budgeting does, is it helps the people accountable for this budget process, typically people in the lean portfolio that are directly accountable for distributing the right amount of funding across development value streams for the best outcomes. What this PB exercise does is provides information they didn't have before, the different perspectives. What we want as an outcome, we know is successful when the people accountable for doing those budget decisions go, I hadn't thought of that. That's success. That's absolutely vital because now they have that information. Now, the fact that they hadn't thought of it, they might say, that's really interesting. However, when you combine these other factors, we still have to go this direction. That's why PB informs. It doesn't dictate budgeting, it directly informs budgeting. There's other factors that influence budgeting: strategic themes, OKRs, enterprise objectives, a number of different things that influence the budgeting process. PB is one of those, but it's a pretty powerful one.
So as an outsider, you might look at this, what we're describing here, and think of it as being very loosey-goosey and sort of all over the place, versus if I'm more traditional, my Stockholm Syndrome perspective of my traditional spreadsheet methodology. So if I'm the financial CPA, Master of Finance background, and I'm trying to get into and validate this process, what kind of guardrails are in place in Lean Agile budgeting to keep us on track and make sure that we're fiduciary financially responsible in our fiduciary duty?
And that's a great question. That's the question most companies ask us when we talk about Lean Agile budgeting. This sounds like the wild, wild west. This is going to be chaos. We can't control anything. There's no accountability. And actually, the opposite is true. It's far more controllable because it's more adjustable. And there's actually much more accountability. When you have a very rigorous, structured, very detailed process, it's easy to hide in the weeds. It's easy to mask issues and concerns and lack of accountability because that's the process. When it's direct accountability, and you can think of it this high level. Now, Lean Agile budgeting is definitely a simplification. Is it absolutely simple, bread and butter, just started off? Not really. It's something that you have to think about analytically, how to introduce that, how to incorporate it. But it is far more simple from a perspective approach. But where the accountability really comes from is its direct accountability. Essentially, if a development value stream is saying, but we can solve more problems if you fund us more. Really? Put your money where your mouth is. In fact, we're going to put our money where your mouth is. Go prove it. And it allows for localized accountability for these development value streams, the arts within the development value streams, each art within that Agile release train, to show direct accountability. Again, the heavier, the more detailed the process is, what I've learned, the easier it is to hide lack of accountability, to hide mistakes, to hide issues. When it's direct, clear accountability, not only do people appreciate that because now they can control their own destiny, but it's very clear to see, are we successful or not? And the result there from that accountability, it's not that we say, oh, you failed, come on the carpet, it's time to, slap the hands, whatever it might be. It's, okay, what failed in the system? You honestly thought you could solve this problem and that budget would do it. It didn't work. What failed us in the system? How do we correct it? So the next time you come to us, it's a more accurate statement. Again, that adjustability and that accountability is greatly exemplified in Lean Agile budgeting. It's not minimized, it's magnified.
And you mentioned it before, but in the context of the cadence or timeline on when Lean Agile budgeting occurs, you suggested it happens perhaps twice a year. And knowing that we sort of work in operational quarters and or may need sort of like budgetary check-ins as we go, what are the best practices around Lean Agile budgeting? And is there any sort of best practice that supports that?
There is. There are definitely some best practices from Scaled Agile, especially, that are based on empirical data and learnings, observations. And it's typically reviewing the budget once per quarter, typically adjusting the budget about twice per year, about every other quarter. That seems to be a pattern. Now, don't assume that's because that's the default pattern, that's what you have to stick to. There are things that need to be taken into consideration that we can adjust maybe more often, maybe less often, usually more often. And what happens is we turn into a rolling wave approach. Rather than this yearly calendar-based budget approach, we turn into a rolling wave aspect. The only thing key about the end of your fiscal year is your tax reporting. It's not tied to, the end of the budget and all that. The budget's going to continue. If your fiscal and calendar year are aligned, just because the budget ends on December 31st, January 1st, you don't stop the presses. You're working on the next opportunities and the next and the next. Why not have a rolling wave approach to that as well? What we find by doing that rolling wave approach, you've probably seen this, the whole if you don't spend it, you lose it problem happens all the time. As trainers, we are inundated with requests for internal non-public classes for a corporation in the November, December timeframe. Why? They have budget they have to use up. If they don't use it up, they're going to lose it. And that's not effective. That's not good stewardship of the budget we've been given. That rolling wave approach instead looks at it and says, okay, based on what we know today, this next quarter, we see where the funding should go. And the real truth is, we had it right last quarter. So there's no adjustments to be made. Great. We get to the end of that quarter and we say, it's been 2 quarters. We need to do participatory budgeting. We need to do other deeper dive analytics into it, take a closer look at that budget and say, are there some changes we have to make? That's why PB tends to be twice a year, because that team seems to be about the right time box to gather new information to make those adjustments. And then based on that, hey, if it comes back that we're overfunding this DVS and need to further fund this other one, transfer some money over, we do that. It's not that we pull fresh money out of the air. We simply transfer money across. Now, when we do that, one of the key things is we're transferring people with that, because we know in corporate world today, the vast majority of our budget is salaries. It's people, not resources, people. People are not resources. And so you're shifting teams and perhaps arts over to a new development value stream. You're bringing a new team onto the island and saying, hey, welcome to your new family. Help us solve our problems. They're bringing their unique skill sets to solve this new area, these new problems. One of the key concerns I get then from the financial people is, yes, but you have a Java developer that's working on that system. Really? They weren't born doing that. They didn't come out of their mother's womb working in Java on that system. They learned it. It is far more financially accountable and fiscally efficient to move people that have been working together to a new technology and space than it is to wait until the next opportunity in that technology and in that space. People are far more fungible than we give them credit for. Lean-Agile budgeting relies on that fact, takes advantage of that fact, and allows us then that adaptability, that adjustability we've been talking about.